Imagine running onto a field, getting the ball, you sprint down the line, and, you finally score what you think is just a brilliant goal.
Yeah.
But then, instead of the crowd cheering, everyone they look at you like you committed a massive foul.
Oh, wow.
Right, because you played by the rules as you understand them, but the lines on this particular field, they were drawn in invisible ink.
That's a great way to put it.
And you're playing a completely different game. That invisible ink is culture.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome into this deep dive. If you are prepping for your exams or just trying to be a better clinician, you are in the exact right place. Today, we are unpacking BCBA Foundations F2.
Right, which is identifying and integrating cultural variables in the assessment process.
Exactly. We're going to show you exactly how, ignoring that cultural ink basically guarantees your behavioral assessments will fail.
Because trying to analyze human behavior without understanding the cultural context, it leaves you completely blind to the actual boundaries of the game. Behavior it can never be analyzed in a vacuum. It's constantly being shaped by, the context of language, family systems, and community norms.
Yeah, and when you strip away that context, you really strip away the function of the behavior itself.
Exactly.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of how all that works, we do have an incredibly relevant focus for today's deep dive.
We do.
And this is brought to you by Amethyst Therapy Services Inc. And they operate on the exact philosophy we're discussing today, right? That culturally responsive care is really the only way to ensure your assessments are ethical, valid, and individualized.
Yeah, it's so critical.
Their whole focus is helping practitioners build systems that make them audit-proof and clinically elite.
Which is huge.
Right, and you can look at the frameworks they're building over at their website. That's www.amethysttherapyservices.com, or just, reach out to them directly at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
And operating with that level of clinical excellence is really exactly what the field requires right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when we consider the stakes of the assessment phase.
Right, which actually brings us to a golden rule right out of the gate for, anyone listening who is prepping for their exams. Mark this down right now.
Write it in bold.
Yes. If you see an answer that ignores culture, mark it as incorrect immediately. It's a trap. Cross it out.
It is a phenomenal rule of thumb because in the science of applied behavior analysis, culture isn't just, it's not a secondary consideration or a soft skill.
Right.
It's the very environment in which the behavior actually occurs.
Right. So let's talk about defining that, because we have to know what culture actually means in this, rigid scientific world of behaviorism.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is B.F. Skinner actually tackled this decades ago in his book Beyond Freedom and Dignity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He defined culture strictly as the contingencies of reinforcement arranged by other people.
Arranged by other people. Okay.
Right. It's how people live, how they raise their children, how they dress, how they treat each other. But for modern practitioners, we really need to elevate that and look at it through the lens of interlocking behavioral contingencies.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. So culture is basically the invisible operating system running in the background of a family's life.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And if you try to install a behavioral software patch, without understanding the OS,
It's going to crash.
It's going to crash completely. Because when we talk about interlocking behavioral contingencies, we're talking about how one person's behavior acts as the discriminative stimulus and then the consequence for another person's behavior within that family system.
Precisely. A culture or a family system, it operates as a macro contingency.
Macro contingency.
Yeah. It's a deeply ingrained pattern of reinforcement and punishment that a specific group of people have historically selected and maintained over time.
Right. So I like to think about cultural contexts like gravity on different planets.
Okay, I like that.
Like the laws of physics, or in our case, the principles of behavior, they're universal. Positive reinforcement always increases behavior, no matter where you are.
Right, that doesn't change.
But the environmental variables, the gravity, those are vastly different. So if you design a rocket engine, like a behavioral intervention, and you test it only in Earth's gravity, and then you try to launch it on Jupiter, it's not going to get off the ground. The principles are true, but the gravity is just heavier.
It's going to fail. And that gravity metaphor illustrates perfectly why the field is moving toward a highly bespoke approach in behavior analysis.
Bespoke, meaning completely custom.
Completely custom.
Yeah.
You cannot take an intervention off the shelf and apply it universally because the gravity of the family's environment will just crush it.
Right.
Writing that custom intervention requires distinguishing between two critical skills, cultural responsiveness and cultural humility.
Right, and the source material draws a hard line between those two.
Yeah.
Because cultural responsiveness, it seems to be about the outward action, right? Like the adaptations we actively make to our treatments based on the variables we identify.
Yeah, it's the application of knowledge. It's understanding how to, say, identify effective reinforcers within a specific community, or just knowing how a family defines a successful outcome.
Okay, so what's cultural humility then?
Well, cultural humility is the internal mechanism. It's the ongoing process of self-reflection and really examining your own beliefs and power dynamics.
Right, checking your own baggage at the door.
Exactly. It requires you to assume that the contingencies that produce the client's current repertoire are genuine and valid, rather than, viewing those behaviors as deficits just because they don't align with your own cultural background.
And if a practitioner lacks that humility, I mean, the most immediate casualty is the assessment phase, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you read that operating system wrong, you're going to make catastrophic misinterpretations. And that's why F2 targets the assessment process.
Because if you gather flawed data, every single goal you write after that is compromised.
Right, but wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Aren't we supposed to rely on standardized tests? I mean, aren't those supposed to be objectively neutral?
That is such a common misconception. And honestly, the assumption of neutrality in standardized testing is one of the most dangerous traps in the entire assessment process.
Really?
Yeah. A norm reference test is designed and normed based on the values of a specific cultural group.
Oh.
Historically, that's the majority Western middle-class culture. Applying them universally can lead to deeply biased, invalid conclusions.
Because the norm is just a statistical average of the people who originally took the test.
Right.
So when we apply that test to a learner from a completely different background, we aren't measuring an objective standard anymore. We're just measuring conformity.
Exactly. You are measuring conformity, not skill. Let me give you a specific example from the source material regarding behavioral mechanics.
Yeah, please.
Think about eye contact and vocal volume. In many Western cultures, a child making direct eye contact and speaking loudly to an adult, that's highly reinforced.
Oh, yeah, we call it confidence. Or being engaged.
Right. But in various other cultures, making direct eye contact with an adult is actively punished.
It's disrespectful.
Well, it's a massive antecedent for a reprimand because it's viewed as aggressive.
Wow. So if an assessor uses a standardized tool that scores, a lack of eye contact as a deficit.
Yep, they might write a goal to increase direct eye contact.
Which means behaviorally, they are actively programming for an extinction burst.
Or creating a huge competing contingency. They're using the therapeutic environment to reinforce a behavior that the natural environment will heavily punish.
That is, we'd be setting the child up for failure in their own home.
Exactly.
So how does a practitioner actually avoid these traps? Because we have to write goals.
Well, the F2 requirements outline a functional approach. You have to use culturally adapted tools, collaborate with community leaders, and ask open-ended questions during the functional behavior assessment, the FBA.
Right.
And crucially, you have to observe the learner in their natural setting.
Yeah.
That is where you actually see the interlocking contingencies at play.
You have to see what the family actually reinforces and punishes.
Exactly. You're mapping out the behavioral gravity of the home.
Because once you have that data, you have to apply it to goal setting. And assessment is really only as good as the socially valid goals it produces, right? And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the sources have this case study about a BCBA named Evelyn.
Oh, Evelyn, yeah.
It is a perfect case study in what not to do. It's a cascading failure of cultural assessment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, her case really shows how these aren't just minor faux pas. They are major ethical violations.
Yeah, let's list them out because it's wild. So she walks into a home for an intake. The family's primary language is Mandarin. And instead of using a professional translator, she relies on the learner's 7-year-old sister to translate everything.
Which instantly compromises all the data.
Yeah.
A 7-year-old does not have the verbal repertoire to translate clinical contingencies or informed consent.
Of course not.
And it alters the family dynamics. You're putting a child in a position of authority over the parents.
Right. So from there, because the data is flawed, she starts writing these arbitrary goals. Like, she writes a target for the learner to use a fork and spoon.
Oh, right.
Completely ignoring that the parents explicitly asked her to teach chopsticks first.
Which is a direct violation of the relevance of behavior rule. You only target behaviors that will produce reinforcement in the post-intervention environment.
Right. If they use chopsticks at dinner, a fork doesn't contact any natural reinforcement.
It just physically isolates the child from their own family meal.
It's terrible. And then it moves into physical care. Evelyn develops a daily hair washing goal for a Black learner, completely ignoring the parent's request for a once-a-week routine.
Yeah, imposing a dominant cultural hygiene standard there is, it shows a total failure to assess the environmental realities. Daily washing can cause severe physical damage to Black hair and scalp.
It borders on physical harm.
It really does. It destroys social validity.
And the last one, she programs a goal for a learner to make a birthday card for their mother. But the family is Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't even celebrate holidays.
She assumed she was programming a universally reinforcing activity. Instead, she's forcing the learner to engage in behavior that has zero value in their environment and likely causes a lot of distress.
Right.
Evelyn basically dismantled the therapeutic relationship because she treated the family's culture as a deficit to be corrected rather than a context to understand.
It's so easy for us to sit here and analyze Evelyn's case retroactively, right? Like, oh, I would never do that.
Right.
But the BACB ethics code requires us to actively hunt down our own blind spots. Like codes 1.07 and 1.10 say we have to evaluate our own biases.
Yes, to maintain clinical excellence.
But here's a practical question. Bias isn't really a behavioral term. It's an internal state. It's covert verbal behavior. How do you objectively measure and change a bias using ABA?
That is a fantastic question. And honestly, we don't yet have a perfect behavioral technology for measuring covert bias.
Yeah.
But we have to operationalize it.
Okay, how?
When we talk about prejudice in behavioral terms, we're talking about stimulus equivalence classes formed over a lifetime of exposure to societal narratives. We can't graph that.
Right, you can't put an internal feeling on a scatter plot.
No. So we analyze the overt behaviors that result from it, the reflexive stereotyping, the assumptions we make during an intake.
Okay, so how do we intervene on that?
The source material points to the American Academy of Family Physicians, and their recommendations are adapted for BCDAs.
What do they suggest?
They suggest exploring prejudices with peers, using statements that welcome multiculturalism, and one very specific antecedent intervention.
Yep.
Building in a pause before interacting.
A pause. Stopping for a second.
Yes. Building in a pause disrupts the automatic, highly practiced chain of prejudiced behavior. It gives you space to transition from a reflexive response to rule-governed behavior.
Oh, that makes so much sense. You actively select a response that aligns with cultural humility instead of just stereotyping.
Exactly. And that pause allows for perspective-taking, which is another crucial recommendation.
Right. I want to look at how this flexibility works in a real-world scenario. There's this example in the sources about a Moroccan family.
I'll have a lunch example.
Yes. So a practitioner is supervising an in-home case, and the family spends the whole morning cooking this massive, beautiful meal for the behavior therapist. They really want her to experience dishes from their culture, but this creates an immediate competing contingency, right?
It does, because under strict old interpretations of the ethics code regarding multiple relationships and gift-giving,
You're supposed to stay under a $10 limit.
right, so the reflexive response is to just decline the meal.
But if the practitioner doesn't build in that pause, if they just decline the food in this family's culture, refusing a meal prepared for a guest is highly offensive.
Highly rude, yes.
It wouldn't just be awkward. It would function as a punisher for the family's attempts to build rapport.
Which actively damages therapeutic trust and undermines why you're even in the home to provide effective treatment.
So what did the agency do in this scenario?
They adapted their policy. They recognized that accepting the food was critical for cultural responsiveness.
Right, so they determined a method to accept it while staying under the $10 limit.
Exactly. Maybe by calculating the cost of a single portion of the homemade ingredients. They adhered to the parameter of the rule, but they prioritized the spirit of cultural humility.
It perfectly illustrates that the ethics code is a framework for clinical decision-making. It's not a blunt instrument.
No, it's not. You have to balance the rigid text of a rule against the potential harm to the outcome. Destroying rapport over a plate of food causes way more damage to the learner than the alternative.
And navigating those exact nuanced real-world gray areas, that is exactly why systems designed by organizations like Amethyst Therapy Services Inc. are so vital.
Yes.
Because they design the frameworks that help you analyze these competing contingencies so you stay audit-proof and ethically grounded.
It completely removes the panic.
Right. So to recap this for you listening, culture impacts interpretation. Your assessments absolutely must align with family expectations.
If you fail to map the gravity of the family's environment, you will misinterpret behavior and treat cultural norms as skill deficits.
Right, and ignoring culture leads directly to invalid conclusions, which is why our golden exam tip is what?
Answers that ignore culture are incorrect.
Cross them off. And make sure to follow Amethyst Therapy Services for more advanced ABA content. Again, that's www.amethysttherapyservices.com.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Oh, okay.
This raises an important question. The source material notes that what is culturally acceptable can change drastically over 20 years, right?
Sure, culture shifts.
If culture is a moving target, how do we design our assessments to prepare learners not just for the norms of today, but for the evolving cultural landscapes they'll have to navigate tomorrow?
Wow. Especially when you think about the internet.
Exactly. We spent this time discussing the physical home and the local community. But a learner today is likely participating in digital microcultures.
Like online gaming, social media ecosystems.
Right. They have their own incredibly rigid contingencies of reinforcement and punishment.
That adds a whole new layer to the F2 requirements.
If a teenager's primary cultural environment and strongest reinforcers exist online, how do we adapt our functional behavior assessments to accurately measure the invisible lines of a purely digital field?
Measuring the gravity of a digital world where the social norms change by the hour.
Exactly.
That completely reframes how we have to approach everything.
Well, something for you to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning those invisible variables, keep mapping those contingencies, and we will catch you next time.